The Davenport mansion had 3 Michelin-starred chefs, yet a 12-year-old girl was starving herself to death within its opulent walls. I was just the maid, but I knew her hunger wasn't for food. The first time I saw Lily refuse a meal, I didn't think much of it. She was 12, and the world of a 12-year-old girl is a shifting, tempestuous sea. The Davenport mansion had 3 full-time chefs, each with a Michelin star to their name, and they'd prepared a deconstructed lobster thermidor. It looked more like a piece of modern art than food. Lily, a wisp of a girl with her father's intense blue eyes and a cloud of pale blonde hair, simply pushed the plate away. "I'm not hungry," she'd whispered, her voice barely registering over the cavernous silence of the formal dining room. Mrs. Davenport had sighed, a delicate, frustrated sound, and tapped her perfectly manicured nails on the polished mahogany. "Darling, Chef Antoine flew the langoustines in from Brittany this morning. At least try a bite." Lily just shook her head, her eyes fixed on the napkin in her lap. Mr. Davenport, a man who moved markets with a single phone call, just grunted from behind his financial paper. To him, his daughter's appetite was just another asset underperforming. I was just the maid. My job was to be invisible, to clear away the evidence of their lives, the smudged wine glasses, the discarded newspapers, the untouched plates of food. But I saw everything. And as the days turned into a week, then 2, the untouched plates became a horrifying pattern. It wasn't just the fancy, intimidating food she was rejecting. It was everything. The simple toast and jam for breakfast, the handcrafted fruit smoothies, the delicate chicken broth the chefs prepared when they grew desperate. Each plate came back to the kitchen, a perfect cold monument to her silent protest. I watched Lily begin to fade. The already slender girl became ethereal, her skin turning translucent, dark circles blooming like bruises under her eyes. She moved through the vast, empty halls of the mansion like a ghost, her footsteps too light to make a sound. The house, always cold and sterile, began to feel like a mausoleum. Mr. Davenport did what he always did. He threw money at the problem. Specialists were flown in from around the world. Nutritionists with glossy pamphlets, therapists with gentle, useless voices, doctors with intimidating machines. They poked and prodded Lily, took her blood, analyzed her diet, and spoke to her in hushed clinical tones. They all came to the same conclusion. There was nothing physically wrong with her. It was psychological. Anorexia, they whispered. A cry for attention. Control. The diagnosis only made Mr. Davenport angrier. Control? He controlled a global empire. How could he not control his own daughter's desire to eat? He fired the chefs and hired new ones. He offered Lily cars, ponies, a private island in the Maldives. He threatened to send her away to a clinic, a place with locked doors and scheduled feedings. Mrs. Davenport, for her part, mostly cried. Not for Lily, I don't think, but for the social embarrassment of it all. What would people say? A Davenport, starving herself in a house overflowing with abundance. I was the one who found Lily's sketchbook. I was turning down her bed, a vast, lonely island of white silk, when it fell from between the pillows. I knew I shouldn't look, but I couldn't help myself. The pages were filled with drawings, not of ponies or castles, but of food. Intricate, detailed sketches of steaming bowls of soup, crusty loaves of bread, a simple apple, a melting scoop of ice cream. But in every drawing there was a glass wall between the food and a small, stick-thin figure in the corner of the page. My heart ached. She wasn't rejecting food. She was starving for it, but something was stopping her from reaching it. No one in this house knew my story. To them, I was Clara, the quiet, efficient maid who came from nowhere. They didn't know that before my life fell apart, I had a life surrounded by food. My family owned a small, bustling trattoria called La Lanterna. My grandmother, my nonna, was the heart of that kitchen. She used to say that we weren't just cooking food, we were cooking memories. She believed every ingredient had a soul, and every dish told a story. She taught me to listen to the sizzle of garlic and olive oil, to understand the sigh of rising dough, to feel the emotions of the person you were cooking for. Our restaurant, our entire life, went up in smoke one night in a terrible fire. I lost everything, and the grief was so profound that I locked that part of myself away. The smell of cooking became the smell of loss, So I came here, to this soulless palace, to be invisible. But seeing Lily, seeing that sketchbook, something in me cracked open. The doctors, the specialists, her parents, they were all trying to force-feed her body. They didn't understand that it was her soul that was starving. That night, the house was tense. Another specialist had left, shaking his head. Mr. Davenport was raging in his study, and I overheard him on the phone, talking about a feeding tube. The words sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't stand by and watch this little girl wither away. So, I made a decision. It was a terrifying risk. I could be fired on the spot for overstepping so dramatically. But I had to try. After the entire household was asleep, I didn't go to my small room in the staff wing. Instead, I crept down to the basement. There, under a dusty canvas sheet, was the old staff kitchen, abandoned years ago when the Davenports had renovated and built the new industrial-grade one upstairs. It was small, antiquated, but it had a gas stove and a few old, heavy pans. My hands were shaking as I lit the burner. The blue flame flickered to life with a soft whoosh. I didn't have access to the fancy pantries upstairs, but I always kept a few things in my room. Simple comforts from a life I'd left behind. A tin of San Marzano tomatoes, a knob of Parmesan, a little bag of flour, an onion, some garlic. I began to cook. I wasn't following a recipe. I was following a memory. The sound of the knife on the cutting board, the smell of the garlic and onion softening in the warm olive oil. It was like waking up a part of my soul I thought had died in the fire. I was making a simple soup, the first thing my nonna ever taught me to make. A dish she made for me whenever I was sick, or sad, or scared. Papa al pomodoro, a thick rustic Tuscan bread and tomato soup. Food that felt like a hug. The aroma began to fill the cold, damp basement air. A warm, savory scent of home and comfort that was utterly alien to this house. An hour later, I had a small steaming bowl of the deep red soup and 2 slices of grilled cheese, toasted to a perfect golden brown in a pan with butter. It was peasant food. It was love. My heart hammered against my ribs as I carried the small tray up the winding back staircase, a ghost in the sleeping mansion. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a thunderclap. I reached the long carpeted hallway of the family wing. Lily's door was at the very end. As I approached, a sliver of light from under her door vanished. She was awake. I took a deep, shuddering breath, balanced the tray in one hand, and raised my other to knock. But before my knuckles could touch the wood, the door silently swung open. Lily was standing there, a fragile silhouette against the dim light of her room. Her wide, haunted eyes weren't looking at me. They were fixed with a shocking intensity on the bowl in my hands. And then she spoke. Her voice a raw, broken whisper I almost didn't hear. "Who are you?" The question hung in the air between us, far heavier than her frail frame should have been able to support. "Who are you?" It wasn't an accusation, not exactly. It was a genuine, desperate inquiry, as if she'd seen an angel or a demon. My name was on the tip of my tongue. Clara, the maid. But I knew that wasn't what she was asking. She was asking why the air in her sterile hallway suddenly smelled of tomatoes and basil and home. "I'm someone who believes soup should never be lonely," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. I gestured with my chin towards the grilled cheese. "It needs a friend." Her eyes, those piercing blue pools of emptiness, flickered from my face down to the tray and back again. There was a war going on in them, deep-seated fear battling a primal, desperate need. She didn't move. She didn't invite me in, but she didn't close the door either. She was a fawn, frozen in the headlights. One wrong move and she'd bolt. So I made a choice. I knelt down, my knees cracking softly on the marble floor, and placed the tray just inside her doorway. The steam from the soup curled up, carrying the scent of my grandmother's kitchen. "My nonna used to say this soup could mend anything," I murmured, more to myself than to her. "Broken hearts, bad days, winter chills." She said the secret wasn't the tomatoes. It was a little bit of sunshine, stirred in at the end. I didn't tell her to eat. I didn't mention her weight or the doctors or her parents. I just shared the story of the food. I then slowly stood up, my eyes never leaving hers. "I will leave it here. It's a gift. You don't have to accept it." I gave her a small, sad smile and turned to walk away, my own heart breaking. I'd failed. I'd overstepped, and it was for nothing. I had taken 2 steps down the hall when I heard it, the faintest sound, like the scrape of ceramic on marble. I stopped, my back rigid, every muscle tense. I didn't dare turn around. Then, a new sound. A small, hesitant slurp. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I squeezed my eyes shut, a single tear tracing a hot path down my cheek. I kept walking, disappearing back into the shadows of the house, leaving her with her secret. The next morning, when I went to clean Lily's room, the tray was outside her door. The bowl was empty. Not just empty, but wiped clean, probably with the last piece of grilled cheese. The sight sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated hope through me. It was a tiny victory, a fragile truce in a silent war, but it was everything. This became our ritual. Every night, long after the house had settled into its strained silence, I would slip down to the abandoned kitchen and cook. I never made the same thing twice. One night it was a creamy polenta with parmesan, so simple it was almost criminal. I told Lily, through a note I left on the tray, how my nonna would stir it for an hour straight, saying she was stirring in her patience. Another night, it was hand-torn pasta with brown butter and sage. I wrote about how the sage came from a pot on our windowsill and smelled like summer rain. I wasn't just feeding her body, I was trying to feed her soul, one story at a time. And slowly, miraculously, a change began. A week into our secret communion, I saw a hint of pink in Lily's cheeks. Her movements seemed less brittle, less ghostly. Once I passed her in the hall, and she met my gaze for a split second, a flicker of something that wasn't despair in her eyes. It might have been gratitude. Mrs. Davenport noticed it too, but her reaction wasn't one of relief. It was suspicion. "She has more energy," she said to her husband one evening, her voice sharp and brittle, echoing from the drawing room as I dusted a nearby bookshelf. "She's playing us, Richard. It's some new tactic. I'm sure of it." Mr. Davenport just grunted, dismissing it. But Mrs. Davenport was like a hawk. She started watching Lily more closely, her eyes narrowed, searching for the source of this inexplicable improvement. My blood ran cold. I knew I had to be more careful than ever. One night Lily left me a note of her own. Tucked under the empty bowl, written in a shaky, childlike script on a torn piece of sketchbook paper, were 2 words. Potato gnocchi. My heart swelled. It wasn't just a request. It was a conversation. It was a sign of life, a desire. That night, I put everything I had into making those gnocchi. I boiled the potatoes until they were fluffy, riced them while they were still hot, and mixed them with the flour using the lightest touch, just as Nonna had taught me. I made a simple, fresh pesto to go with them. They were little pillows of perfection, my masterpiece of hope. I carried the tray up the back stairs, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. We were doing it. We were actually doing it. I felt a swell of pride and a fierce, protective love for the girl in that room. I reached her door, which was slightly ajar, and pushed it open gently, a smile on my face. "Lily, I made—" The words died in my throat. The room was bathed in the cold, harsh light of the main overhead lamp, a light that was never usually on. Lily was nowhere to be seen. Sitting in the center of the room on a delicate antique chair was Mrs. Davenport. Her face was a mask of icy fury, and in her lap she was holding the empty polenta bowl from the week before, which I had foolishly forgotten to retrieve from its hiding spot in the laundry chute. She raised her eyes to meet mine, her voice cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. "So, you're the one who thinks they can fix my daughter with peasant food." My blood turned to ice water. The tray of gnocchi suddenly felt impossibly heavy in my hands, the warm, comforting scent of basil and garlic turning cloying and accusatory. Mrs. Davenport didn't move a muscle, just stared at me with an expression of such cold contempt that I felt myself physically shrink. The empty polenta bowl in her lap was like a piece of evidence at a trial, and I was clearly guilty. "Ma'am, I can explain," I stammered. my voice barely a whisper. The carefully constructed world of our midnight kitchen, our secret stories, was crumbling around me. "Explain?" she scoffed, the words sharp and brittle. She rose from the chair with a fluid, predatory grace. "Explain how you, a maid, have been sneaking food to my daughter behind our backs, undermining the specialists, the doctors, the thousands of dollars we have spent trying to help her. What is this? Some pathetic attempt to play hero?" Her voice was low but carried a venom that coiled in the air. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to scream that her specialists with their charts and her husband with his money were trying to fix a machine, not a child. I wanted to tell her about the glass wall in Lily's drawings, about the starving soul behind the starving body. But the words wouldn't come. In her world, I was just the help. My thoughts, my feelings, my grandmother's wisdom, they were all worthless. "I was just trying to help," I whispered, my eyes pleading. "Help?" she laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "You've been poisoning her. This slop." She gestured dismissively at the tray in my hands. "Do you have any idea what's in this? The calories, the carbohydrates. The specialists have her on a strictly controlled regimen." "She's not eating the regimen." The words burst out of me, louder than I intended. "She's not eating anything. She eats this." For a moment, a flicker of something unreadable crossed her features. Doubt? Confusion? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a fresh wave of fury. "You are fired, of course," she said, her tone flat and final, as if discussing the weather. "Pack your things. I want you out of my house in the hour. You're lucky I don't call the police, endangering a minor." The threat hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. My mind reeled. Fired. Out of the house. Away from Lily. A wave of panic, cold and absolute, washed over me. What would happen to her when I was gone? The midnight kitchen would go dark. The stories would stop. The glass wall would rebuild itself, thicker than ever. "Please, Mrs. Davenport," I begged, taking a step forward. "Don't do this to her. She's getting better. Look at her. Just look at her." "I see a child who is being manipulated by a servant," she snapped, her face hardening into a marble mask. "Get out. Now." She turned her back on me, a clear dismissal. The conversation was over. Defeated, my shoulders slumped. The scent of the gnocchi was a cruel joke. I turned to leave, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. But as I reached the door, a small voice cut through the tension. "No." We both froze. Standing in the doorway of her adjoining bathroom was Lily. She was wearing silk pajamas that hung off her bony frame, but she stood taller than I had ever seen her. Her chin was lifted and her blue eyes, usually so haunted, were blazing with a fire that mirrored her mother's. "You can't make her leave," Lily said, her voice small but surprisingly steady. Mrs. Davenport spun around, her eyes wide with shock. Lily rarely spoke to her, and certainly never with such defiance. "Lily, darling, go back to bed. This is an adult matter." "She's the only one who helped," Lily continued, taking a hesitant step into the room. Her eyes were locked on me. "The doctors talked about me like I wasn't there. Dad tried to bribe me. You just cried. But Clara, she listened." "Listened? She's the maid, Lily. She gets paid to be quiet," Mrs. Davenport said, her voice dripping with condescension. "She listened to what I wasn't saying," Lily insisted, her voice gaining strength. "Her food, it's not like your food. It's quiet. It doesn't yell at you." I stared at her, my heart aching with a fierce, protective love. She understood. Quiet food. It was the perfect description for what I was trying to do. Simple, honest, unassuming food that didn't demand anything. Mrs. Davenport's perfectly sculpted face twisted in disbelief. "This is absurd. You're a child. You don't know what you're saying. Clara is leaving." "If she leaves, I'll stop eating again," Lily said, the words falling into the silent room like stones into a still pond. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. A promise. And this time, I won't start again. Ever. The color drained from Mrs. Davenport's face. She stared at her daughter, truly seeing her for the first time in months. She saw the fragile frame, but she also saw the steel in her spine, the absolute conviction in her eyes. The power dynamic in the room shifted dramatically. The billionaire's wife, the woman who commanded an army of staff and ran international charities, was suddenly powerless against the quiet will of her 12-year-old daughter. She looked from Lily's defiant face to my terrified one, and then down at the tray I was still holding. The gnocchi were probably cold by now. Her mind was clearly racing, recalculating, assessing this new, impossible variable. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound was the ticking of a delicate porcelain clock on the mantelpiece. Finally she spoke, her voice strained, almost unrecognizable. "Fine." The word was clipped, forced. She looked at me, her eyes glittering with a mixture of hatred and grudging defeat. "You can stay. For now." She turned her gaze to the tray. "But you will not be sneaking around my house like a thief in the night. Tomorrow you will cook for her in the main kitchen. You will cook for all of us, and I will be watching every single thing you do." Her lips curled into a semblance of a smile, but it was all teeth. "Let's see what your peasant food can really do, shall we? You'll be making lunch for my husband's most important business associate. He's a notoriously difficult food critic who's closing a $5 billion merger with us. Let's hope your sunshine soup doesn't cost us the deal." The main kitchen was a world away from my basement sanctuary. It was a cavern of stainless steel and clicking digital displays, a laboratory for food, not a home for it. The 3 Michelin-starred chefs, who had been unfired and rehired at some point, watched me with open hostility as I walked in the next morning. To them I was an insult, a walking mockery of their culinary degrees and their liquid nitrogen canisters. Mrs. Davenport had clearly briefed them, and their sneers followed me as I surveyed my new, intimidating domain. My hands trembled as I tied on a pristine white apron. This wasn't a secret meal shared in the quiet of the night. This was a command performance, a trial by fire, cooking for a notoriously difficult food critic and a $5 billion merger. The pressure was immense, designed to make me fail spectacularly. Mrs. Davenport didn't want me to succeed. She wanted to prove to Lily and to herself that my simple cooking was a fluke, a childish fantasy. But then I saw Lily. She was sitting at the small breakfast nook at the edge of the kitchen, a place she hadn't sat in months. She clutched her sketchbook to her chest and watched me with wide, hopeful eyes. She was my audience of one, the only one who mattered. Her presence was an anchor in the storm of tension. I took a deep breath, the scent of antiseptic cleaner being replaced by the imagined aroma of my nonna's kitchen. I could do this. This wasn't for them. It was for her. I decided not to try and compete with the chefs. I couldn't create their architectural towers of foam and jelly. I could only cook what I knew. I could only cook from the heart. I decided to make risotto alla milanese with ossobuco. It was a classic, a dish that required patience and love, not tricks. It was the celebratory meal my family made when my father finally paid off the loan for the trattoria. It was a dish of quiet triumph. The chefs watched my every move. When I began to toast the arborio rice in a pan with just onion and butter, one of them, Chef Antoine, let out a derisive snort. "No sofrito base? Amateur." I ignored him. I was listening to the rice, waiting for the moment the grains turned translucent with a pinprick of white at the center, just as Nonna taught me. I added the first ladle of hot, saffron-infused broth, and the kitchen filled with a sound that was alien to this space, a gentle, rhythmic sizzle. The sound of comfort. For the next half hour, I did nothing but stand and stir. Stirring risotto is a meditation. Clockwise, counterclockwise, folding the creamy starch from the rice into the broth. I wasn't thinking about the merger or the critic. I was thinking of Lily. With every stir, I imagined I was smoothing away a little of her anxiety. With every ladle of broth, I was pouring in warmth and life. I could feel her watching me, and I glanced over. She had opened her sketchbook and was drawing, a small secret smile on her face. When Mr. Davenport and his associate, a severe-looking man named Mr. Dubois, arrived for lunch, the tension was thick enough to taste. Mr. Davenport looked at me with pure disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend why the maid was in charge of the most important meal of his quarter. Mrs. Davenport sat with a smug, expectant look on her face, waiting for the disaster. I served the food myself. The risotto was a perfect wave of golden yellow, shimmering with parmesan and butter. The ossobuco was tender, falling off the bone, the rich aroma of the gremolata parsley, lemon zest, and garlic cutting through the richness. It was simple. It was honest. I placed a plate in front of Mr. Dubois, my heart hammering. He stared at it for a long moment. He picked up his fork, poked at the risotto, and then took a small, hesitant bite. The entire room held its breath. I watched his face. His severe expression didn't change at first. Then, a flicker. His eyes closed for just a second. He took another bite, this time of the osso buco. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully. The silence stretched on, becoming unbearable. Finally, he set down his fork and looked at Mr. Davenport. "Where?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Did you find this, chef?" Mr. Davenport opened his mouth, then closed it, looking utterly bewildered. "This is not food for closing a deal," Mr. Dubois continued, and Mrs. Davenport's smile widened in triumph. But then he went on. "This is food for celebrating one. It tastes like my mother's house on a Sunday afternoon." He picked up his fork again. "Davenport, we have a deal. Any man who understands the importance of a meal like this is a man I can do business with." The shock in the room was palpable. Mr. Davenport stared, stunned, as Mr. Dubois cleaned his plate with gusto. Mrs. Davenport's face had gone pale, her smugness evaporating. But my eyes were on Lily. She had pushed her sketchbook aside and was eating, taking slow, deliberate bites of risotto, her eyes shining with unshed tears of victory. Our victory. That lunch changed everything. Mr. Davenport started looking at me not as staff, but as some sort of miracle worker. The chefs, humbled and confused, started asking me questions, not with scorn, but with genuine curiosity. But the biggest change was in Mrs. Davenport. Later that evening, she found me in the now empty kitchen, wiping down the counters. "The clinic I called for Lily," she began, her voice quiet, stripped of its usual icy edge. "They sent me her file. I never read it properly, just the diagnosis." She unfolded a piece of paper. It was one of Lily's drawings from the clinic. A little girl, stick-thin, sitting alone at a huge empty table, while shadowy figures with dollar signs for eyes and mouths full of sharp teeth screamed at her. They said she felt unheard, that she felt like just another asset to be managed. Her eyes were filled with a shame so profound it was painful to witness. "Your food," she said, her voice cracking. It's the first time someone has spoken to her without using words. I don't know how to do that." "You can learn," I said softly. "I can teach you." And so I did. I stayed at the Davenport mansion, but my job description changed. I became the house's heart. I taught Mrs. Davenport how to make simple things, how to listen to the ingredients. We'd cook together, and sometimes Lily would join us, not cooking yet, but sitting and drawing, filling her sketchbooks with images of food that no longer had a glass wall in front of it. The house, once so cold and silent, began to fill with the sounds and smells of a home. My secret talent didn't just save Lily, it saved all of them. And in healing their broken family, I finally healed myself, finding a new home, a new purpose, and a new La Lanterna in the most unexpected of places.